All right, so welcome back to another episode of Brew School right here in the Taste Kitchen. And of course, today we are going to explore coffee at its finest. Now, here in Brew School, we've actually covered everything from equipment, different type of brewing techniques, a variety of coffee trends. And today we're going to talk about sourcing and the regions where great coffee comes from around the world. With me today, I've got Sam from Partners Coffee. Great to have you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so Sam, you are the roaster there, so we are getting it straight from the mouth there at Partners Coffee. Tell us a little bit about what you do and kind of how you got into the coffee business.
So I'm one of three roasters here at Partners Coffee. We've got a pretty small team, but I'm responsible for about a third of our roasting program. Essentially what I do in a given day is I turn on the machine at maybe 5 or 6 a.m. each morning. So I'm usually the first person here. I start staging batches. We'll roast somewhere between anywhere from 30 to 70 batches of coffee in a day. And it usually takes about 13, 14, 15 minutes. So most of what I'm doing is I'm manipulating time while manipulating temperature over a course of time throughout a given roast and using gas values to try to replicate previous good results that we want to make sure following roasts follow.
Interesting.
So that's the bulk of what I do. I'm also responsible for blending, making sure the right coffees get to our production team for bagging, and I've got a little bit of a hand in quality control too.
Okay, great. Well, you mentioned kind of the QA approach that you guys take there. Let's kind of break down the science of roasting a little bit before we get started, because I thought that was intriguing, because you're looking at successful measurements that are determining a way in which you're trying to replicate. What are some of the key things that you're looking for when you get a batch that's just perfectly roasted?
So we use a technology where we can watch temperature, and we essentially get what we call a roast curve. And that's a plot of temperature either of the coffee seeds or beans themselves and of the environmental air inside of the drum. And what will happen is we get this curve that's accurate within like a fraction of a degree Fahrenheit. And for each roast that has that unique curve that's specific to that coffee. What we want to do is we want to try to replicate that absolutely as close as possible, make sure that each batch are staying within like a degree or two of the intended target. Then we get some like metadata on that too, basically what temperature the coffee arrives at when it's done, how long it takes, what different phases of the roast itself go through in terms of temperature and time plots. And we're trying to follow all of that and make it consistent from batch to batch to batch.
So that sounds like a very specific process when you're having to boil down to basically 1 degree of difference for success and failure. I don't know if I'd want that job. It sounds a little tough.
I love it. Well, it's really helpful. We've got this great technology that'll help us meet those checkpoints. And of course, we're always tasting, and if something's a little bit off, we want to make sure that it's within the expected parameters of what we want the coffee to taste like, how we want it to roast. But really, computers have helped us a ton in maintaining that accuracy and precision.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, can you actually taste the profile difference between a bean that has been 1 degree off in the roasting process versus one that wasn't?
A degree might be a little bit close. That's getting into the territory of that's a tough thing to taste in its own, but a difference in the shape of the roasting curve. So it looks sort of like this arced S curve. A difference in that will be noticeable. A difference of say 5 degrees will be noticeable, or even just a difference in like whether the roast slowed down too much late in the process of roasting a particular coffee. All those things are things where in different degrees, they're more or less noticeable.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, let's jump into the varieties and the regions that Partners works with. Sure. You guys, of course, I know just from the examples that we have here on the Chef Top, work in a lot of countries around the world. So let's kind of break down some of the regions that you find maybe the most, maybe the easiest to work with, and some that maybe are the most challenging. So kind of just pick out the ones you think, hey, let's talk about this one for, kind of the approach toward ease of access.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite regions to work with is Colombia. Colombia is a little bit unique in that it's got 2 harvests in a given year. It's equatorial, so you get a little
Right.
bit of coffee harvested with the southern hemisphere and a little bit of coffee harvested with the northern hemisphere. And
Right.
that's really helpful. That means year round, we're always getting a supply of pretty fresh coffee, which you can't say of other regions, like for example, Guatemala.
Hmm.
There are really large volumes of coffee roasted there, but it's not quite as available year round as Colombia.
Mm.
And the
Okay.
cool thing is, if you look at Colombia, there's also a lot of really distinct growing regions in the country. So in some cases, there might be, Brazil, you typically think of coffees that are chocolatey, nutty. There is some like pretty impressive variety in the flavor profile. But for the most part, if you think of Brazilian coffee, there's one sort of flavor profile that all of it tends to skew towards.
Yeah.
Colombia,
Kind
that
of
is true
staple.
as well. There's a lot of fruit character, a lot of chocolate, cherry, that kind of flavor profile. But there's also, for example, in Northern Colombia, the Department of Antioquia has a lot of like really complex tropical fruits, beautiful coffees coming out of there. Or if you look at the Southern Department of Nariño, you have a lot of like green grape acidity, um, like roasted nut flavors, chocolate. If you look at the Department of Huila, which is kind of in between the two, you see a lot of like citrus and berries. So there's really a lot of diversity there. And that's something that I love working with.
Yeah. And as tight as those countries are geographically, obviously some of their regions have a lot of the same weather and climate. What differentiates a bean from another that are so geographically near each other?
So there's a lot of different factors. Some of it can be in terms of tradition. In one country, maybe they've been practicing a pretty unique processing style that's been the
Okay.
course of 50 years of processing good coffee in a certain way, and that impacts the flavor. But one of the things that we really like to think about here is both elevation and latitude.
Okay.
Those two things work together to determine what's called a diurnal temperature range, which pretty much means the difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures. If you have a really warm daytime temperature, you'll get a lot of sweetness out of a coffee, a lot of cherry development, which is the fruit
Hmm.
that the seed of the coffee that bean grows in. And with a really cool night, you preserve a lot of acidity. So if you see really high elevation coffees near the equator, you'll get a lot of like really beautiful complexity, lots of sweetness, but also lots of acidity retained, which are
Right.
generally good things that we're looking for in the coffee. If you
Yep.
go somewhere that's at a higher latitude, you'll see more extreme shifts at those elevations. And so the ideal conditions for growing coffee might be a little bit lower. And that's why I see a lot of Colombian coffees grown at the equivalent of 7,000 feet above sea level. And somewhere like Hawaii might be much, much less.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So it has, I can see where just maybe 100 miles can make a huge difference in the way a bean turns
Absolutely.
out. So I know you had picked one of these, the El Ramo. Talk to me a little bit about this particular bean and the roasting process with it.
Yeah, of course. So this is a little bit of unique coffee in terms of our lineup. It's a single origin coffee. It's from a town called Caicedo, which is in that northern department of Colombia called Antioquia.
Okay.
This coffee is consisting of multiple lots, but all from one cooperative in this town of Caicedo. So what happens is farmers around that town will deliver their coffee to this co-op. The co-op purchases the coffee, it gets blended together, and then it comes to us.
Interesting.
And essentially
Okay.
what it is it's a way to source a single origin coffee that's available year round. Like I said, Colombia, you've got this like pretty constant influx of new lots. They harvest multiple times a year, especially in this part of the country. We're fortunate to get a fresh
Right.
infusion of coffee both later in the year and the middle of the year. And what we're able to do is we're able to create a consistent flavor profile year round using small lots from farmers contributing to this co-op from around this region.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a unique sourcing project that we have, but it allows us to have this coffee. It's available year round. That's got this beautiful like tropical fruit complexity to it. It's remarkably sweet, but also something that we don't have to worry about necessarily aging out. We can have
Mhm.
on menu year round, and somebody always knows that they're going to be able to find a reasonably fresh harvest of El Ramo in our inventory.
Yeah, I like that. Well, it's a very utilitarian coffee. It sounds like when you get to
Very.
these co-ops like that, is that a process that you look for around in different regions where co-ops kind of form together and can kind of help sustain a supply source? Is that kind of one of the key things that Partners tries to go to?
Yeah, and it absolutely depends on the region too, and on our particular needs in that region. A Rama, for example, is also a sourcing project for us, and it helps us to connect with farmers in the region who are producing really beautiful, like top quality lots. And so,
Hmm.
on the one hand, a Rama is consisting of maybe the work of 400, 500 different producers, but
Right.
also it's a way that we sort of reached first contact with some of our favorite producers in the region. So on our single origin menu, you might see the coffee of El Faldon. Don Rubain of El Faldon also contributes to the lots that go into Ramo. We sell his coffee as a single origin each year on top of El Ramo, but also we are able to make that connection through that sourcing project,
Interesting.
which we've done through the help of importers in the region.
Yeah. So do you have buyers that go out into the regions themselves? How do you guys source the teams that actually go out and kind of learn which farms and which locations are the best for the potential coffee bean for Partners?
So we do have one green buyer who does all the sourcing for the company. Essentially, what he'll do is he'll contact importers and exporters who together will help us identify those relationships.
Okay.
And so he works very, very closely with, for example, the exporter we work with in Colombia is Pergamino. Pergamino helped us make contact with the producers of the co-op that contributes coffee to El Rama. And
Gotcha.
so through that sort of supply chain, we're able to make those connections.
Interesting. So obviously, South America is a great, obviously a great resource for great beans, but there's a lot of new places around the world that are starting to
Mhm.
pop up in terms of providing beans to the industry. Anything that kind of sticks out in your mind that says, "Hey, this is a region that may be kind of under the radar right now that could be a potential huge hit in the future"?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of countries that have either been producing coffee for a long time, but the quality isn't where we would necessarily want for specialty coffee today for most
Right.
of their lots. There's also a lot that haven't been producing coffee for very long, at least at the specialty grade, but who are now starting to. So those are really interesting areas to look towards. For example, Southeast Asia traditionally produces a lot of Robusta coffee, which is generally considered a lower quality lot. It gets used a lot in instant coffee and supermarket coffee, but there's
Oh,
also a lot of countries like Thailand that are now producing the usually higher quality Arabica, and we're seeing lots of gains in quality there.
that's
Southern China is
interesting.
another example. Yes, there's a lot of places where it's definitely going to take a little bit of time to get the kind of quality that we would want for, the equivalent of top lots in, say, Colombia or Ethiopia. But definitely, there's parts of the world where those gains are going to happen in the near future.
Yeah. Is there a reason that you are seeing these gains starting to occur in Southeast Asia? What seems to be the genesis of why they're getting better?
I think a lot of it is probably attention to premiums paid for higher quality.
Ah,
That's sort of a model that's been working well for the special industry in a lot of other areas.
hmm.
So
It's kind
most
of like
of what you would
olive
think of as
oils in
coffee grade
Italy.
regions. Yeah, exactly. There's
Yeah.
a premium on producing a really high quality crop. And if producers who have been traditionally selling to the commodity system find that they're not able to make the same profitability off the commodity system, they might
Yep.
consider switching to specialty.
Very
And some of
cool.
that too is just access to education and gains made over time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about a few things because when whether you're a professional out there that's looking for an angle on your coffee resource in your restaurant or your hotel or so on, and you're looking at certain kind of roast profiles, if you were giving tips to an operator that's out there saying, "Hey, we're going to bring in a specialty coffee and we're going to partner with someone like a Partners," what are some things that they need to be looking for to kind of isolate the cream of the crop? What would you say these are the things you should be looking for out there as a restaurant operator or maybe a hotel operator?
That's a really good question. I think I would definitely look towards companies with strong educational programs. That's really valuable, even in just trying to connect you with a coffee that's right for your particular business.
Yeah.
I'll be the first to say that I think there's certain coffees that some people enjoy more than others. And it's better to have the sort of access to that kind of knowledge and be able to say, this is right for you, or this is not right for you, and have that kind of personal connection with whoever you're buying your coffee from. I think that's just as, if not more valuable than necessarily having, the quote unquote best coffee in the world.
Yeah. It's kind of like, we are seeing this at the chef level where they're creating these relationships with farmers. In most cases, it might be protein farmers, whether it's a fisherman or a cattle farmer or a bovine. They just really get down to the level of understanding, usually through education from that particular farmer, of why that product is better, which in essence helps them sell it at the retail front to a consumer who's coming into their restaurant or their hotel. So I can see that happening in coffee quite a bit. I know you guys have a food service program. You've started doing some commercial. Have you had restaurants or operators reach out to you for the aspect of education?
I probably couldn't tell you that much about that side of the business myself. I definitely could tell you that we work with a lot of restaurants who come in for classes or for specific barista training. That is really helpful in just helping our accounts who are primarily in food service to have exceptional coffee programs as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, when we started the idea of Brew School here, obviously part of it was because of your own Brew School right there in Brooklyn, to kind of take a cue off that in terms of really learning and getting educated around coffee, because it is one of those products that has become such an artisan product that both consumers and operators, restaurant operators, food service operators alike, have really kind of taken it under their wing, much like wine and some of the more artistry style culinary elements in a food service operation. Coffee has really risen to that level. So it's great to see that you guys are spending so much time on not only the process, the regions, but also on the education, Sam. So thanks for stopping in on Taste Kitchen Day. We really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to talk with you.
All right. All right. So for all of you listening in, or maybe you're watching here on YouTube, make sure and hit the bell to subscribe. And of course, we also have a variety of other shows here on the network. So make sure and just hit foodabletv.com. You can catch a ton of our content. And if you have not checked us out over on Amazon Prime, make sure and do so. Just search Foodable Network. You'll see a ton of Amazon Prime premium content coming right to you from Taste Kitchen and Foodable Network. We will catch you next time right here on Taste Kitchen.